Hey, so I'm here to talk about the Sony RX100M2 and some of the things I like about it, some of the things I don't like about it, and some of the things that I've noticed that are different between the original RX100, because I also have had one of those, and it's not all good things that are different between them, so I'm going to talk about all of that stuff. So first of all, the build quality. The original RX100 was made in Japan, and the RX100M2 is made in China, and that wouldn't be a huge problem if the build quality was exactly the same, but unfortunately it's not. One of the things that I noticed right away was that the zoom ring on the RX100M2 was really stiff when I first got it, and it sort of has ironed itself out now, but it didn't feel nearly as good as the original one when it first came out of the box. Now the second thing I noticed, and this is the more important one, is that up at the top here there is a gap in the two panels that you can press together with your fingers like that, and it's also not flush with the front part of the body. You can feel the bump when you run your finger over it. Now if you go into the store and you look at the original RX100 versus the Mark II, the original one, the panel is cinched tightly to the front part of the panel all the way through up to the top, just the way it is here where the two screws are. And so the panels on the two of them are not fitted together the same way. The Mark II has a more sloppy fit between the two panels. The second thing that they added for the Mark II, of course there's the screen that tilts, and that's quite good. It has a good feel to it. The bracket that it's on is pretty good, and there's a little magnet up at the top, I believe it's right there, so when you go to close it, it snaps on and it doesn't wiggle around, so that's nice. It adds the hot shoe, and they give you the hot shoe cover, which is nice because it keeps dirt out of it, obviously, but it also gives it a more clean look. And they added the step zoom, which is nice, and I like the step zoom, but the zoom wheel itself is quite laggy at times. If you go to aperture priority or shutter priority and you try to use the wheel, it can be quite, I have it set to zoom specifically, but if you set it to standard and then you go to even program and it does program shift, if you set it, it's quite laggy. And it doesn't really have a snappy, responsive feel when you use the ring for this. Whereas meanwhile, if you use the dial at the back to do it, it's much faster, much more responsive. But in addition to that lag that you can get sometimes with the zoom wheel or the front wheel, you also get, to me anyway, some delays when you're trying to navigate quickly through the menus. It's not a huge thing, but for example, I'm shooting this video right now on a Canon PowerShot S100. Now that's a camera from 2011 it was released, and the zoom wheel response and the menu response is noticeably quicker and more snappy on the S100 from 2 years ago than on this camera, which is only from a few months ago. So that's another thing that I've noticed. And that's not specific to the Mark II. That's the Mark I was like that as well, the original RX100. And one of the reasons I went to try the Mark II is because I was hoping that the menu system would be improved in speed, but it was not. Now, one thing that was changed from the original RX100 is that the HDMI port was moved from the bottom to the side. Now that's good if you want to be using it while it's on a tripod, but I did find that these little doors that they've added here are a little bit small, and the plastic they use on the door is not very nice, and just getting your fingernail into that tiny little gap is not very nice. And so just the whole feel of opening and closing that door doesn't feel very good, and it also doesn't feel like that door will last for very long. And then once you've got your camera on a tripod, another thing I've noticed is that this zoom ring, hopefully you can see it here, the zoom ring that you actually turn actually sticks out a little bit further than the bottom of the camera. And so if you have it on a tripod and you have your hot shoe coming over to here, you actually can't really turn the zoom ring properly when it's on a tripod. And so that's kind of a very strange thing that I've noticed. It's kind of hard to believe that they didn't at least think of that or something. You know, one of the other things that I noticed regarding the menu is that when you set what your display button will do, you can go here and pick between graphic display, display all info, no info, level, histogram, and you can select or deselect all these things, and then when you push the display button it will cycle through all these screens. But all of these screens are separate. For example, on the level screen you can only have the level on its own, and you can't have anything else with the level. Same with the histogram. You only have the histogram. You don't have other information except for the stuff along the bottom: shutter speed, aperture, exposure, ISO, that stuff. But you don't get any of this stuff up through here on the display all info screen. You don't get any of that stuff. On other cameras, including the Canon G15 that I've had, and even cameras like this S100 and the S110, there was a custom screens you could make up where you can check whether you wanted the level or the histogram to be displayed on the same screen as all of the other information, so you could have all of the information in one screen. Now sure, that might make for a more packed screen, but in that case it was up to you to decide what information you wanted on the screen versus having to hit the display button and cycle through different screens where you're only seeing certain information that is isolated from the rest. Now I just wanted to show you what the step zoom looks like. Basically you turn the wheel and it will, even if you turn it only one tiny notch, it will advance to the next reset zoom. So 100, 70, 50, 35. And so that's nice when you just want to, you know, I want to shoot a photo at 50. You can just turn it twice or whatever. And that's good. I like that. But like I said before briefly, when you turn the wheel on the Canon S100 even, it snaps to the next focus more quickly than this does. Now another thing I just want to say, if you put the zoom function from step to standard, this is the way the original RX100 would zoom, and it's really quite slow. See, I'm turning the wheel, I'm turning, and there's all type, there's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 increments in between 28 and 35. Now sure, that's certainly very precise, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't really get faster when you turn it faster. So if you just want to get to 100 very quickly, you got to turn, and then you're at 100. But that takes a long time to get to 100. The faster way is to just hit the rocker at the front and just go to 100, and that's faster than using the ring. So I appreciate the adding of the step zoom, because that does make it faster, but both modes of zoom feel a bit laggy to me. Now the ring on the front does have a good point to not having the tactile increments like the S-series rings do. One of them, of course, is that you can use the ring for focus, and there is a nice mode where you can have the camera do an autofocus, and then when you have your finger pressed halfway down, you can use the ring to tweak the focus. And that mode is quite nice. It's useful if you're shooting something like towards the sun and the camera's having trouble picking up an autofocus. You can just override it, turn the zoom wheel, and focus. And it also has peaking, and it has various, you can do red, white, yellow, and you can do, as well as all of that, you can also do high, medium, and low for the peaking setting. Now, the ring on the front does have a good point to not having the tactile increments like the S-series rings do. One of them, of course, is that you can use the ring for focus, and there is a nice mode where you can have the camera do an autofocus, and then when you have your finger pressed halfway down, you can use the ring to tweak the focus. And that mode is quite nice. It's useful if you're shooting something like towards the sun and the camera's having trouble picking up an autofocus. You can just override it, turn the zoom wheel, and focus. And it also has peaking, and it has various, you can do red, white, yellow, and you can do, as well as all of that, you can also do high, medium, and low. And the peaking will only, you can keep it on medium. It's not going to show up all the time. Peaking will only show up if you have manual focus or the DMF focus, which is the one that you tweak it after you press the shutter halfway down. So the peaking only shows up manual DMF, but you can still keep it on. You can have your peaking set to medium or whatever setting you like, and it's not going to show up under single shot autofocus. So you don't have to see it all the time. You don't have to turn it off all the time either. As far as the rest of the Belkoi goes, it's quite good, and it's very similar to the original RX100 that was made in Japan, and that's why it's really quite a shame that those few aspects, specifically the gaps at the tops of each side, are there, because other than that, it really does feel quite similar to the original RX100 that was made in Japan. The dial at the top here has a good solid feel to it. It's not too easy to turn. It has a really good click when you move it. The rocker here has a good feel. The dial at the front has a great feel to it. It's really quite good. At the back here you've got a dial that it's pretty good, and it's a rocker dial, so you press on each side and it will rock back and forth accordingly. One thing though is that these buttons here, all of the buttons like function, play, question mark, menu, none of those have a very good click to them. So when you're pressing them, it really, you hardly even feel it, and some people have said it's unengaging to shoot, and I would have to agree that it's really not the most interactive camera in terms of, you know, getting a good tactile feel when you're pressing this and doing that. It's kind of, you know, it's not the most tactile camera, but it does have, you know, it has all the buttons that you need, so it will get the job done. It will get what you're doing done, but you just might not feel it as much as you want to. Now I want to show something that I really do like versus some other camera brands like Canon that don't do this, although I was at the store looking at the Ricoh GR, the APS-C fixed lens camera, yesterday, and it did do this, and I have seen some other brands that do it. But when you go to open the battery door, it does not shut off the camera. Now Canon, as soon as you open the battery door, camera just shuts off. Can't do anything. As you can see, you can just keep the camera on. It doesn't stop working at all when the battery door is open. So you can switch memory cards, whatever you want to do, take out the memory card, whatever, and you don't even have to have the camera just shut down harshly when you do that. Now that's not that big a deal, but for example, if the door gets opened accidentally and you're trying to take a picture, you can still finish and take that picture and then close it after, versus Canon, where it does not do that. Now another thing I want to show was when you push the record button here, it is very slow, in my opinion, to actually get the recording started. You see, it still has not shown up here. Well, it didn't, I guess it didn't seem to work. So there, now it is. But I have been in a situation, the one with the squirrels, there's a video about it, where I was trying to get a video started, and I was pressing this, and it really was taking a long time for the video to get started. Now, because of where the button is placed, where the thumb rest is here, and you do get a little bit of a, you know, a little ridge there that's supposed to prevent you from pressing it. But it's placed in a place where I have pressed it by accident when I'm trying to take pictures, and so then I've got to go through the whole process of the video starting to record, video records, you press again, and the video has to finish recording. The whole process is at least 10-15 second process before you can get out of that whole thing and start taking your picture again. So what you can do though, and this is quite good, is you can set the button, the record button, and I'm not sure exactly where it is. Maybe it's here. Movie button, yes. So you can set it from always, which is, you know, obviously it will start recording movie anywhere, to movie mode only. And you can't really see it probably, but you can set it to movie mode only, and then that way you press it during your normal photo mode and it doesn't start a movie. And that's the way I like it, because I find it annoying to get movies starting to record when you're not trying to take a movie. One thing that I do think is good, when I first got the camera, it would keep going back to menu screen number 1 right here every time you went out of the menu. Now there is a way to make it so that it will go to where you were before, and that's just to set this here menu start from top to previous, and that way, so I'm here, if I get out of the menu, when I get back into the menu, it's going to be there again where I was, and so that's good. Now I think there are still some things that you set, for example, something like meter mode. That brings you to a screen like this where it's like a live view with the setting, and if you change it, that brings you back to the shooting screen, and then you've got to go back to the menu again. As far as I know, there is no way to exit this live view selection screen and go right back to the menu where you were. Well, I guess you can press the menu button. But it doesn't actually prompt you on the screen to do that. It just says exit main button, and then you do that. But I guess if you hit the menu button, you can do that, and then if it's set to previous, it will go back to where you were. So that's okay, I guess. Now the flash is quite good. It's very powerful by default, so I have it set to -1 in the flash compensation here. I have it set to -1 because it really is quite powerful. You just turn it on here and then it pops up. You've probably seen this before, and then you can tip it back like that if you want to do fill. Now I've only used it a couple times. I found the fill wasn't that great looking, but at least it's there and it lets you do it. So that's a good point, I would say. Now, one of the things people say is it's quite slippery, and I'd have to agree. It's not very. There's no grip at the front. It's just painted aluminum. I was looking at the Ricoh GR. That's the other camera I'm looking at, where it has it's wider, so it has some space to space the buttons out a little bit more, add a bit more rubber at the back, which is quite nice. Although it's not thicker and not taller. But it has a nice big grip for your hand that's covered in rubber all through the front, side, and then it continues on to a big strip of rubber along the back. And you really can get a great grip on that Ricoh GR, so have a look at that if you want to see what I'm talking about. But the Ricoh GR grip is really quite good. I have a few accessories for this. I have the 2-piece premium jacket case, so you can keep the bottom piece on there and have a strap around your neck, and that adds like a leather texture to the front. That adds a bit of grip. And there's the Richard Franiac grip you can get, tape that on. There's the Sony grip that you can get and tape that on. There's also, for the original one, there was a grip from JB Designs. And that's the one I bought when I had the original camera, because it was a piece that had a plate on the bottom that you screwed into the tripod, and then it was a nice grip along the side here. But if you wanted to take it on and off, you could just unscrew it, take it on and off whenever you wanted, and that way, because the other two grips are stuck on with double-sided tape, so once you put it on, you can't really get it off easily. Certainly not, on and off by just screwing it. So that's why I bought the JB Designs grip for the original RX100. Unfortunately, the design of the base, because of the screen, because it's a few millimeters thicker, is different on the Mark II, so you can't use it. But I'm not necessarily keeping this Mark II. Like I said, the other camera that I'm looking at is the Ricoh GR digital, the APS-C one, the GR5. Now, as far as buttons and stuff that you get when you are shooting for custom modes and stuff, there is a function button here. You press the function button, that brings up a screen where it's hard for you to see, but you get exposure compensation. You get 7 slots, and you can put into all of these whatever you want. So the first 5 are configured by default: exposure compensation, ISO, white balance, dynamic range optimization, which sort of cranks up the brightness level or the gamma level in shadows for a scene where some parts of it are light and some parts of it are dark. It sort of evens out the contrast and brings out detail and shadows. And that's that / HDR, so you can have HDR or different levels of dynamic range optimization, or you can just have it on auto for either one. And then picture effect, those are like literally filters, like Instagram filters live in the camera. And then there's these two are left empty by default, and you can add your own. So I have it autofocus area, center, multi, flexible spot. That's basically, I use that I usually leave it on multi by default. That lets the camera choose where it wants to focus. But if the camera's not choosing where I want to focus, then I will just put it over to flexible spot, and then I'll move it myself, which is what I use most of the time. But then I showed you the DMF, where you can tweak it after you press the half down, and sometimes I use that if the single shot autofocus isn't behaving the way I want, isn't focusing where I want, and so I'll use that. And that's why I have these two set to the 2 custom spots. And the rest of the stuff, you can do most of the stuff, like anything that you'd want to customize, you can really do most of it, with the exception of a few things, like I showed you, where you can't make up a custom display screen with, like the histogram and the level on one screen. You have to, for some reason, have separate screens for both. But other than that, most stuff that you would expect is there. And while we're talking about the different display screens, I would like to say that the level that you do get is quite good, although Unfortunately, the S100 has a little bit of trouble with focusing, so I think you can see it now. The level's quite good, and the histogram is good. It sort of is small. I guess the idea is it's out of your way when you probably can't really see it that well, but I have it set to grid lines and diagonal lines, so it has the 9-piece grid, I think, plus diagonal lines, and I like that. That's something that the like the Canon S100 doesn't have, for example. It just has normal 4/3 grid line. And things like the white balance I find is quite accurate in most situations, with a few exceptions. You can do things like in the menu here, you can go over to white balance, and there's a couple different things you can do. You can do a evaluation where there's a little circle, you press the shutter, it evaluates the area in that circle and then sets the white balance to what you think it's going to be. I mean what the camera thinks it's going to be. Then there's this one where you can do a custom setup with the temperature or the color saturation or whatever it is. And then there's one here, ctemp/filter, color temperature, and then you can set a custom color temperature here. So you get a color temperature, you get a U, like a U setting that you can do. And so there's quite a few. If the auto white balance isn't behaving the way you want, there's certainly quite a few things you can do to customize your own the way you want it. Now I'm just going to wrap up now and just cover the rest of the things I have on my list. The auto exposure I found is a touch underexposed in a lot of situations, so I usually have it at plus 0.3 or plus 0.7, and I find that gets me to where I think an accurate exposure should be. Usually plus 0.3 is good. And the Canon cameras, the way they auto expose, I think their zero is around 0.3 or 0.7 on the Sony. So the Sony tends to be a touch dark by default, but that's not a big deal. You can just fix that with compensation. I mentioned the build quality is solid except for the panels at the side. The macro is quite good. At 28mm you can get really close up there. I think it's either 2 inches or 4 inches. I'm not entirely sure, but it's quite good. The at 28mm, when you have it at f1.8, the depth of field is good. When you're doing a portrait at f1.8, the depth of field is really nice, especially for a camera that's really small like this. When you're zoomed in a lot, the camera doesn't focus quite as close as, say, a G15 used to. At least I think that's the case from what I remember. But when you're zoomed in, it does continue to perform well in terms of autofocus and sharpness and everything like that. I was out in the fog. I took a bunch of photos in really thick fog, and I was zoomed in to the whole 100mm, and it was still very, very sharp, and the autofocus worked every time, even when it was so foggy that there was hardly anything there to focus on. Now it is a contrast autofocus system, so in the dark, if it's very, very dark, it will have a bit of trouble, but I found it's pretty good. So as far as I know, that's basically all I have on the list. The photo quality is really good, especially for a camera this size. You know, you can get bigger sensors on compact, like the Ricoh GR, Fuji X100S, Nikon Coolpix A, but all of those have a fixed lens and no image stabilization, although they have the bigger sensor and the fast lenses. For a camera that's got a zoom like this, you know, other options are stuff like the Fuji XQ1, the Canon S100 and 20, Nikon P330. You know, there's a whole bunch of cameras that all have the 1/1.7 sensor size, and this has the 1-inch sensor size, so that's got a bigger sensor than all of them, and so it's going to provide the best quality images in a compact, pocketable camera. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there are plenty of interface issues and sort of performance issues that made it so that this camera is actually less enjoyable to use than the Canon S100 that I have here that's from 2011. Now that's a shame. Of course, the image quality is not even close. The image quality on the RX100 is way better. But as far as just navigating the menus, using the zoom, all of the interface related stuff, I find that the S100 interface is faster, more responsive, and more enjoyable to use than the RX100, and that is a shame.